So let me go over 4 things that I recommend you doing, or basically 4 tips that I would recommend before you even start. So number 1, you gotta find your why. Now, everybody has to have a reason that they do things, right? We all have reasons we do things. But to me, whether it's your family, your wife, your children, your family, all of the above, maybe it's because you dream of living in this big, beautiful house or driving, I don't know, a Ferrari or something like that. But no matter what, you gotta find your why, write down your goals, very important. And my recommendation is to basically have like a 1-year goal and maybe like a 5-year goal. To me, that makes sense. The important thing is to have it in writing so that one day you can look back at it and say, hey, did I do what it takes to get to where I wanted to be? And before we get into the video, this is when I'm gonna ask to please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new. We're putting out new final expense sales training videos and insurance sales content like all the time, like pretty much every week. And if you'd like a copy of my Overcoming Objections super file, stick around to the end of this video and I'm gonna show you how to get this bad boy for yourself. And I'm telling you, you're gonna love it because there's gonna be a lot of killer sales material, all based on overcoming objections in different types of scenarios. Another thing that helps for a lot of people is a vision board. Now, I'm not going to get into this, but the bottom line is, having pictures of the things that you want, or that you expect to have. I know at one point, my wife had her vision board had actually a picture of a big, beautiful house. And then a few years ago, we actually ended up building our own house. So to me, that's a good example. A vision board, very huge. Number 3, you've got to do the work on yourself and basically do everything you can to learn how to do basic sales technique, overcoming objections, and pretty much mastering the art of persuasion. To me, that's really huge. Work on yourself, and then you get to number 4, which basically is to teach yourself the work ethic. Now, I know that sounds kind of silly. A lot of us, we already kind of have work ethic. But let me share a quick story. At one point, I had a small office. I had insurance agents selling out of the office, and there was only a few of them. But I decided I couldn't be a babysitter anymore. I really didn't like micromanaging. And I found out that that's what these agents needed because 3 of them were doing really well. And I basically said, you know what? Why don't you guys do this from home? You've got computers, no problem. Within 2 months, they all quit, because they were used to being managed. They needed someone to be on top of them, to stand over them, which I wasn't doing anymore. So again, you've got to force yourself to do the work and basically teach yourself the work ethic. So let's talk about the stages. You've got your brand spanking new agent. You've got to learn the products. You got to get comfortable making presentations. So basically, to me, that means you've got to learn the floor. So you guys have heard me talk about the floor in my videos in the past. The floor is like the bare minimum of what you need to actually have any chance whatsoever. What I'm getting at as a new agent, you've got to get comfortable with the technology. You've got to get comfortable making presentations while you're doing other things, multitasking, and you have to sound smooth and professional while you're making your presentation. And basically, you've got to be able to do that right from the start. Once you've done this, we get to that second stage, and you've gotten comfortable doing this for really a couple of months. It probably will take for your typical agent. Now you're basically in the middle. You're grouped in that area where I want to say, most agents are. You've gotten comfortable dealing with objections. You've already gotten the technique down that you're using to overcome the objections. Now, let me just say this. A big fail in our industry is a lot of agents never actually do that. So to me, you want to be a mediocre average agent, you better learn how to overcome objections. You better have a technique of doing it. But by the time you're in this middle area, I want to say the process has gotten easy. It's kind of like just another day, and maybe even to the point where it's getting monotonous. Now, let's go over that category 3, where you have become a top producer. Now, guys, this is This is where not a lot of agents get. But at this point, you've stopped accepting the excuses. You're not listening to the nonsense that these folks are giving. You're moving on to the next appointment at the right time, but not too early. In other words, by now you've kind of got this the spidey sense, for Spider-Man, right? You've got the spidey sense on when it's time to move on or when you've got someone that you think you can close. So to me, it takes a while to get to that point, but that's really a big difference between your average agent and your top producer. Right off the bat, you've done so many presentations, you made so many sales that you've got this instinct, this natural instinct on what to do and when to move forward. And most important at this point, that's when your talent really kicks in. So now it's like, the only way for me to describe this, it's like you're almost hypnotizing the prospects into buying. Okay, so let me share a story with you about when that effect started happening for me. There were two things that happened early in my life insurance sales career that really were life changing. All right, so I used to have, as a Hartford agent, I used to have to go into the office 5 days a week. The owner and the manager would both say the same thing. They were telling me that I was listening to the client's excuses and I was walking away from easy sales. And they were telling me that I needed to record myself because I was probably messing up the presentation. So, of course, pulling out a recorder at a client's house, and that's how it was back then. I had the old Walmart recorder. It was difficult to even get the courage to do that while I'm making a presentation. I always thought it would mess me up. So when I finally did it, and I'll never forget, this woman had an apartment she had purchased, and she was single. She had a child. And so I'm making the presentation with her. I pulled out the recording. She was cool about it. I recorded it. She did not buy. She didn't have insurance. So here, when I left this lady with a new mortgage and an infant without life insurance. Okay, that's how great I was, right? I got in the car, I hit play, and that was when things started to change. I heard what I was doing and saying, and I didn't realize how bad I was. And that's just the truth. I actually thought I was doing pretty good. I was pretty smooth because I was making sales. But when I heard that, it changed everything. So I remember at that point, I immediately started working on the things that needed to change, the things that I was doing wrong or wasn't doing. One of the biggest things was I didn't have energy and enthusiasm. I sounded very monotone in the presentation. And it was really killing me. So the next presentation I made, which was actually the next day, again, it was a single lady, and I think her children were adult children by that time. But I remember making this presentation and flapping my arms and using all this energy and enthusiasm, and she was smiling at me. And I remember at one point, I think she was even kind of like giggling, like laughing at me, not with me, at me, because of the show that I was putting on. And then she handed me the check. I go to the next appointment, very similar, handed me the check. I literally went from overnight from, I want to say I was closing maybe 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5, to doubling that, to now being able to close 2 out of 4 or 2 out of 5. The next thing, remember I told you there was 2 things. I was listening to the excuses. I did not know how to deal with the objections. When the client said, well, we've got insurance, or we've got to think about it, we got to talk it over, or whatever the excuse was, I tend to let them off the hook. I mean, I did what I knew to do to kind of like try to overcome the objection, but it wasn't enough. And so I had decided that enough was enough. And I remember at the point, I was at the office in the morning talking to the boss about it. I said, tonight, I got that appointment today at 5 with that couple. I am not going to take no for an answer, and that's exactly what happened. Now check this out. I get to this house. He got home from work. She was a housewife, right? She did all the work. She took care of him and the infant, a little brand new newborn baby, right? So one of the things she said to me within the first 5 minutes of the presentation is, listen, don't be offended, but he's not going to buy from you today. He doesn't buy anything when he first meets somebody, okay? So I'll never forget that she said that. I made the presentation. At the end, he gave me well, I've got insurance through work, so we're gonna have to think about, I can't remember what the excuse was. But I remember at that point, I wasn't gonna give up. And I remember talking about the baby and his wife, and I remember bringing up, hey, I'm just curious, if you were to pass away today, what would your wife and baby do? Where would they have to live? Because the money's not coming into the house anymore. I remember I was addressing all these things, and I totally put it on him. At one point, I made a statement that was pretty harsh. Because remember, guys, I wasn't going to walk out of the house unless they either kicked me out or they handed me the check. And I remember saying something to him like, I want you to think about this. After all that we've done, if I leave this house and you don't buy the insurance, you do realize your wife is probably going to start thinking, does my husband love me just enough to put on this show and act like he wants to spend this money on this very important insurance? Or does he actually love me enough to protect me and get the insurance that's going to save me from having to move into my sister's house? So I don't remember exactly how I said it, but I did make a comment like that to them. And I remember the two of them looking at each other, and she actually gave him a little bit of an attitude. Here's the cool part. He hands me the check at the end. Now, I can't remember exactly what all went on between then and then, but he did. And she said, I can't believe he did that. He never, ever, ever does that. He never buys from anybody when he first meets them. If you'd like a copy of the Overcoming Objections super file that I mentioned way back at the beginning of the video, just email me at doug@ufesonline.com. If you'd like information on working with us on our remote final expense sales platform, the one where you can get like 20 to 30 appointments every single day, just email me at that same address. Very important. When you put the needs of your clients first, everything else will usually fall right into place. So get up off that couch and get out there, or get that headset on. Whatever you do, do something good for someone today. Happy hunting.